Okay, guys, so we're here at the Eleusinia Retreat Center, and I'm Jessica, and this is Jay.
Hello, everyone.
Together we run Eleusinia Retreat, and I want to talk today a little bit about whether sharing a room at a psychedelic retreat is a good idea or not. Because it's an industry norm. It's pretty common that many retreats do sometimes stack people 4 deep per room. Like four strangers sharing a room.
And I think that's the more important point. We're talking about sharing a room with strangers.
Yes.
Not sharing a room with like siblings or family members of that.
Totally different story. Totally different story.
Exactly.
Though maybe some of these things that I have listed here that might be things to look out for might also apply to a sibling or a family situation, just less so.
Well, exactly. I mean, your siblings and family members, you know them, you know their quirks, and you have that family bond and relationship where, certain formalities don't matter as much. But when it's a complete stranger and you're coming to a new place already, you're coming to a new setting, and all of a sudden now there's a new person in that one space that you kind of a lot of times want for yourself, so to speak. That one area where you're sort of, by yourself that,
Well, yeah, so the average age at our retreat is about 60,
about
50s, 60s.
Higher, yeah.
And that's a little bit older than, I think, the average age for summer camp, right? So for most of these people, it's been a long time since you've shared a room with someone.
It's a long time since college or since you had a dorm or roommate kind of a thing.
Right,
right. Many of you.
And I mean, with age, we do become a little bit set in our ways, or we have different expectations of comfort.
And habits.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just have a question, Jay. If you were planning a psychedelic retreat, and let's take cost as out of the equation, do you think it's a good idea to have a roommate?
If cost is not an issue, then I think, well, let me phrase it this way. There are sometimes benefits in having a roommate.
Yes.
In the sense that you're having these experiences. And a lot of times what we've seen is when, in the past when we did have retreats where we had more of the shared option available, that people did bond with their roommate, whoever that may be.
Yes.
Even sometimes more so than the other guests.
Yeah. So let's just to clarify, Eleusinia Retreat has been in operation for a little bit over 3 years or so. And when we did start out, we did always at every retreat have a, let's say, a more accessibly priced shared room option on our roster. Now, after a certain amount of time of operating like that, I saw a lot of benefits to having a roommate. But I also saw a lot of drawbacks. And when we sat there and did the math and say, okay, who is really missing out? How did this negatively impact somebody? The wise thing I felt to do was to switch over to a only private room type of model.
Well, I think what we did was not only switch over to a private room model, but by having more rooms, we at least tried to make it more cost effective.
Well, yes, because we did move to a larger facility where we went from 6 guest bedrooms to now we're at 10. And so we do get a lot more, let's say, single travelers, and we have been able to make some of those rooms a little more financially accessible. But
for a single traveler,
and so I do want to think of because I think that when you're looking for a retreat, a lot of times you're just looking at the price tag, and maybe before something unfortunate happens, you're not really considering what could be the consequences of sharing a room at a retreat where the goal is to be at a certain point in an altered state of mind. What are the consequences of sharing that room with a stranger?
Mm-hmm. Like going back to your first question, yes, if cost is not an option, then going for a private room, 100%. Just knowing that you have a space that you can go to, that it's not shared, that you don't have to worry about somebody else's, what you want to call them, habits or, certain idiosyncrasies or things of that nature, that it is truly your space to be at while still having a group dynamic. Because, you have both options in that sense. If you have a private room, you have your own room that's always there, but you're still in a setting where you have others around to interact with if necessary. But it's on your schedule, not on somebody else's.
Right. And if you think about it, like a psychedelic retreat can be quite expensive. It is on the expensive side of what you would consider a vacation.
And Club Med can be quite expensive too. But it's a
Yes.
different type of vacation. Or a
So
different type
everybody
of
has
journey.
their own threshold of what they consider expensive. But even so, I would say whether it's in a big energy investment or a big financial investment, a psychedelic retreat is a lot. And running the risk of having a problem with a roommate or something about the roommate situation that impacts and colors your experience it's a risk.
It is. And not only that, but we mentioned about room, but you're also sharing a bathroom at that point too,
Yes.
which adds a whole different level of, nuances that you are sharing at that point.
Okay. So I don't want people to get confused while they're listening to this that this is how we do things. No, all of our rooms have a private bathroom.
Correct.
But if you are going to a retreat that has shared rooms, chances are you're going to have to share that bathroom and that room, and sometimes a bunk with another person, or in some cases up to 3 other people,
Yeah.
or more. I've seen some ayahuasca retreats where they do this like huge dormitory with rows of bunk beds. So
Yeah, but I'm glad you pointed that out. All our rooms are all private with their own private in-suite bathrooms.
private bathrooms, private rooms. So because I think that maybe the casual shopper has not really thought about how a roommate situation could potentially impact them, I actually made a list so that we can talk about what could possibly go wrong. And some of these are being divergent, they're quite serious. Some of them are comical. Some of them are comical, but become quite serious when you're thinking of something that is like high stakes, like that you plan for and you prepare for, like a psychedelic retreat. So the most common that we dealt with, the most common was sometimes people are coming to a retreat on not as like their first stop on their travels. Sometimes they've spent some time traveling around Central America, South America, or just traveling around. And let's say the street food has been a little bit too tempting. I can understand it. Like when I'm in Mexico City, I want to eat all of the street tacos. They're delicious. They're great. But when you are traveling like for the first time in a long time, or you're not used to, let's say the different bugs that could be in street food, then it can have some pretty unpleasant impact on your digestive system.
It's not immediate. It sometimes takes a couple of days for it to
Right.
show up.
So you could find yourself in a roommate situation where your roommate is suffering from, let's say, explosive diarrhea or vomiting, those things. And on nights when like we have something like the next day we have a macro dose, people generally don't sleep that well anyway.
The first night, yeah.
Yes. And if you are kept up all night by the or other more unpleasant sounds, that could impact your experience. Now, the inverse of that was what if it's you?
Exactly.
What if it's you that you had all those street tacos, and then
Not only that, but instead of sort of relieving yourself, you're trying to actually hold it together. So
yes, because you don't want to bother your roommate. You don't want them to hear you. You don't want to stink up the place. Or there's all sorts of things that could go on in your mind. You could be doing that thing where like you don't want sounds to come out, so you turn on the faucet in the shower. So like people like I don't know, Jay, have you ever done that?
Turn on the shower.
Yeah.
And left it on?
Like turn on the shower, turn on the faucet so that
we can hear on the outside.
Yeah.
I know.
It's just not a comfortable place to be. It's not a comfortable state to be in when you have something as big as like maybe your first psilocybin macrodose the next
Just
day.
an added source of stress, basically.
Added source of stress. That could be further complicated if you are coming to a retreat with the intention of working on some OCD issues, maybe health-related OCD issues. And when you have a roommate that is ill, then that could be very uncomfortable.
And remember, we're saying a lot of times these illnesses are just in particular to a person, but we're all humans. So if somebody else is sick, we have that immediate sense of like, am I going to get sick too, kind of a thing. Even though in the case of like, a food-related issue, that's not the case.
Well, you are technically sharing a bathroom.
Yeah.
So if someone does have some travel-related illness,
That
there is a chance that it could ruin the rest of your week too, not just because of the serenade.
But like you said, it's another added source of stress and just uncertainty.
Right. Uncertainty and stress in a situation that is already a little bit stressful. I mean, like stressful in an anticipatory way, but also stressful for someone visiting. It is always a little tense and everyone is a little bit nervous the day before the macrodose here. So we don't necessarily want to add anything on top of that. So I'm going to go to my list of what else could possibly go wrong. Oh, yes. The lovely thing about being a snorer is that when you're snoring, you're not aware of the fact that you're snoring. You are blissfully asleep. And snoring can get to be so extreme that you're even appear unrousable. As in, like you really should be using a CPAP machine or something like that. That snoring can be quite serious. So if you end up having a roommate that has a problem like this, and either they're not aware of it or maybe they don't care, then that can make a room that you paid for, a room that you were like almost uninhabitable for you. And it's not something that a retreat organizer can necessarily fix for you on the fly.
And vice versa.
Yes.
If you're a snorer type kind of
yes.
thing.
If you're a snorer or if you use a CPAP machine, it is I think it's just a no-brainer that you should be booking a private room. But
that doesn't always happen.
Those are all very, very separate things.
And you can provide all the earplugs, but that doesn't really.
That's not going to fix it. Okay, so, or let's say even you find out that your roommate is a snorer on that first night, and if the psychedelic session is the next day, you're going to be sleep deprived for that experience.
And then your attention is going to be focused on not getting enough sleep rather than focusing on the actual experience itself.
Okay, so I have something else on my list too. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there is. After a psychedelic experience, you're often feeling a little bit like, just say, vulnerable. And sometimes people like to be alone. And they want to spend some time in quiet contemplation. And having a roommate can make that a little bit tough. And so I see people sometimes that want to really gravitate towards having company, gravitate towards conversation, and others that just really need their own space and need to just withdraw and have that quiet contemplation time. Now, having a private room gives you both of those options. But if you have a roommate, that option of being on your own doesn't really exist.
The one caveat I would put is you do have 100 acres here. And there's plenty of room for people to have.
Yeah, so if you did come with your partner or your sister or whatever, and you guys are sharing a room, at least it's not a stranger, okay?
Right.
That you're worried about encroaching on their space. I think that if you had a partner or a sibling or a parent that you were here with, and you said, I do need some time alone, or you guys, or maybe you could have a little bit easier access to comfortable silences, but the roommate that is a stranger that you've known for a day, 2 days or so. At that point, it complicates things.
I think, like you mentioned, it's the notion of having choices. While there are options available for obviously being secluded, there's a difference in having your own room to seclude in versus having a living room or another area of the house to be secluded in.
Right. So you have options. You can retreat, you can withdraw, you can extend and interact. You have all sorts of options. Now, this brings me on to the part that's a little bit more serious. Psychedelic retreats are often marketed to and they attract many individuals that have some pretty heavy problems that they're dealing with, heavy psychological problems. And it probably doesn't matter how well a retreat screens. There's always going to be let's say somebody who got around that screening, somebody that is dealing with something that's probably a little bit too heavy to involve a roommate situation.
And these experiences themselves can be quite jarring. So even for those who feel they are
Stable,
emotionally stable, mentally stable, this is sort of shaking that snow globe a little bit. It can quite be a jarring, heroic experience in itself. And how
Right.
somebody reacts to it. It might not even be something they predicted and how they might react to it.
Right.
And so, like you mentioned earlier, having that time afterwards, that space
Yes.
to be able to process becomes even more vital.
Yeah, but there's also when you do have a roommate, in a good way and then also in like not so great way, you are tying your stories together a bit. Your retreat story, your psychedelic retreat story is going to be attached. And like looking back at our experience so far is like sometimes, let's say for example, there have been several situations where we have had to, due to displays of instability, had to deny service to somebody, as in like arrange for their return home before either the completion of the retreat or at the very beginning, like before the retreat is even started. Then, if that's your roommate, and you started this retreat experience with someone there, and then someone not.
And sometimes
That's
just people
jarring.
have family issues. That's not something that happened at the retreat. They may have had something happen back home.
Right.
And they have to return early, or they have to leave, so to speak.
Yes.
And
so
all of a sudden,
whatever it is whatever it is part of their story now is part of your story and is going to impact it in a way that, and yes, in some cases in a beautiful way, in a great way, but in some cases it's not. So, I think that it's probably better to not have a room, and that's why we removed that option.
right, at least when it comes to strangers, I think, like we talked about at the beginning, there are a lot of benefits sometimes with coming with family members.
Most of those benefits, I think, come in after the retreat.
Yes.
Where you
Well-
have someone that's close to you, that understands the experience, that experienced
No,
it with
no.
you.
I don't agree with that. I think even at the retreat itself, obviously, there's a lot of benefits in coming with a loved one or coming with a friend. We've had plenty of like friends come together, share a room, and had, quite amazing experiences that not only were able to share after the retreat, but, even as the experiences have been, and a psychedelic experience about 4 to 6 hours for what we call a macrodose. So even after that particular experience, they spend a lot of time just discussing things with each other,
Right.
even in their rooms, so to speak.
But I think is really is great is that conversation can continue long after the retreat.
And because it's a friend or family member, you already know there's no discomfort at asking for space or not asking for space.
Right. Or
You already have that
having like
relationship built in.
those comfortable silences.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
There's nothing uncomfortable. There's no need. There's no stranger there. It's somebody you know, kind of a thing. So it's a different relationship altogether and a different dynamic.
Right. So
One thing I would add, though, I don't know if it's on your list. Is there another one?
no,
on
I
your
think I
list?
finished what's on my list. Do you have something else?
I would. So, this is more just basics on logistics. Obviously, when you guys are here, sometimes you want to contact family members, you want to have a phone conversation with them. And chances are, if you have a roommate, you're not going to be having that conversation in the room. So you're sort of making time to do that outside, you know.
Hopefully for the roommate, you're not having that conversation in the room while they're trying to have their quiet contemplation time.
Right, or vice versa. It's just little things of you
Yes.
like light on, if you like light off, if you like certain lights on and certain lights off, just little things that we dealt with when we were younger, when we had roommates or had roommates.
Well, I also felt a little bit more flexible about, and I think that one of the goals of having a psychedelic experience is to become more flexible, which is, I think, that why sometimes roommate situations turn out so favorable compared to, let's say, if you went to another non-psychedelic type retreat that you would have a roommate with.
And one thing with experiences, as we tell you all these experiences are different when you guys come. So you said you could be with a roommate that had a very different experience than how your experience went. Sometimes that can be an amazing thing to talk about with the roommate. Sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. And sometimes it can even be a little bit irritating because it could be a moment where you had quite a challenging experience and your roommate might have had a very euphoric experience or vice versa.
And you don't want to harsh their mellow, and
Exactly.
they don't want to parade their blissful experience in front of you.
And they don't want to gloat
Yeah.
and vice versa. It's very common for us to concern ourselves with what somebody else is going through in these experiences. And we don't want that to take away from somebody's own experience. And sort of having that option to be able to sort of segregate or be able to be part of a group setting or be able to, go to your room or vice versa, having those options again can be an amazing tool that you have to sort of work with if you do have your own room.
Right, right. Oh yeah, there was something else on my list that because when I talked about that, how retreats are often marketed to people who are dealing with some heavy things.
Yes.
Some of those heavy things could also be substance abuse, and it can be really tough to prepare for a retreat when you are dealing with a substance use disorder. And having a roommate that is dealing with those symptoms, or even like withdrawal symptoms, or it's something that they can't necessarily control in the moment, and it's something that could have a pretty significant impact on your experience. So yeah, I don't think that's just another reason why I think that sharing a room with a stranger is not necessarily the best plan.
And you don't know what you're going to get.
You really don't. You really don't. And I am really surprised how so many retreats put in, like, sometimes stack them 4 deep. And it is really important to pay attention to with the pricing. Isn't what are you getting for that? Are you getting a private room? Are you having to share a bathroom with someone? And to really think, how could that impact my experience? Do you have anything else to add?
I think you covered it.
Think I covered it? I didn't paint like too bleak of an experience. I hope that people that have visited us in the past and had amazing roommate experiences don't
We've
look
had
like,
a number of guests back when we used to have shared rooms available that did have amazing roommates. The one caveat I would add is, which is more rare, I mean, when I was younger, and I used to have roommates all through college, and then later on, when I was in law school, I actually had my own room. And at first I was nervous about that because I was so used to always having somebody around that having your own room felt like, almost a sense of like loneliness or emptiness in that aspect of it. But I would put all those thoughts to the side because, we have an opportunity, the way we've set up our program here, that while you have your own room, there's plenty of opportunity.
Plenty of
to have
common
interaction.
spaces, little living rooms where we sit and talk and interact. But yeah, the important part is that you have a place to withdraw to if you need to.
If you need that space, if you need that aspect of it, it's there. And, and you always have that option available if you have your own room. While still taking advantage of all the group dynamic, group bonding that actually, takes place here.
So, not just about the roommate part. Often we do get a lot of questions about the psilocybin experience itself. Is that a private experience or is it a group experience? Exactly what does that look like? And it's always a little bit of a struggle for me to explain, because I think that when somebody thinks about like psilocybin therapy, they have this image of a small, like a clinical room where someone's sitting on a sofa with eye mask and someone's holding their hand. That's what would have popped in my head when I was shopping around. That's what I was thinking about. But it's our experience here that being enclosed in a room can be quite anxiety-inducing for many people in an altered state of consciousness.
And it creates a feeling of just feeling trapped.
A feeling of just trapped, yes. So our psilocybin experiences start out in this sort of like a yoga structure outside. It's called the Nest. You can see it on our Instagram. It's like a very beautiful, open among the trees structure. And then after the effects of the psilocybin start to take place, people then move on to these like little nooks of privacy sprinkled throughout the garden. So it is
I mean, just so people understand, we have sort of an 100-acre facility with massive gardens and open spaces,
Right.
which we've sort of curated for the guests. And within these spaces are also areas of, privacy that people have, that if they do want space to themselves, they have the opportunity to do so, while at the same time being able to be interactive, with the staff as well, and guests later on in the experience as well.
Right. So if you do come with a family member that is your roommate, so if you're not like stuck with them throughout your experience that way. So I think that the image that comes to mind when you're thinking about psychedelic retreats is like that ayahuasca look of a large room with all these little pallets laid out and the buckets for people to vomit.
Or sitting in a circle.
While our experiences start out in a way that is like very similar to that, because it's a yoga area and people have little yoga mats and they're doing the meditation.
Not the vomit bucket, though.
No vomit buckets. We do everything in our power to prevent nausea.
And psilocybin is a substance that, unlike ayahuasca,
you can take medications for nausea.
To address nausea, yes.
Yeah. So but they start out in that group setting, and then find their own like little areas of privacy, little nooks, little seating areas sprinkled throughout the garden.
And unlike other places, you're not stuck in one room or one place. There's the ability to actually move around through the different spaces that we have, created for you.
Right. And and we actually encourage that of like making little changes within your experience of like moving from one little seating area to another. So it is, in a way, a group experience, but it is more like a parallel group experience.
Well, it's a little hard to describe
privacy.
Because with psilocybin there are going to be moments when you may gravitate towards people in general, and there'll be other moments when it's truly your experience and that you are going through it on your own, so to speak.
But it is a non-specific amplifier. It amplifies many aspects of consciousness, and that what is being amplified could be that sense of being enclosed in a room, enclosed in like that sort of like clinical setting. Or what could be amplified is your desire to talk, to interact, and that's what we have our facilitators here for. But also what could be amplified is your aversion to interact, your aversion to have to speak to somebody. So the way that we have it set up allows for any of those things to play out naturally. There is something that's in between the idea of going on a camping trip with friends and having mushrooms in the woods, or going to an ayahuasca retreat where you're stuck in one big room and on pallets and listening to the retching and all of the ayahuasca sounds. And it's something also that isn't quite like the clinical setting where you're in this room.
And it's a big difference when you're embraced by nature, and you're in an open setting where you don't feel any of that sense of being stuck somewhere or being entrapped somewhere or being around people you don't want to be around, or feeling that you have to be surrounded by people. Where here you have the options, during your experiences to actually be able to shift from locations, within our property.
And then afterwards, if you want to be just comfortable in your own room, journaling, listening to music, it is your own space. It's not something that it's not a grown-up sleepover where you have people packed into all into the same room or bunk beds.
Right. Yet it's still taking into the value of the group setting as well. Our meals, are essentially in a group dynamic. So we have lots of opportunity for you all to actually be interacting with people.
So you have your private room, but you're not necessarily lonely.
No. There's no sense of lonely. If anything, people that come tend to very much bond with the other people who are there with them, or who have met at the retreat.
So do you think we covered everything about the possible pitfalls of having a roommate at a psychedelic retreat?
Yeah, I think, if it's something about affordability, if you can get a private room, go for the private room,
Right.
And know that having a private room does not mean, I guess there's retreats out there like these silent retreats or certain meditation retreats where you can't speak to anybody or have any interaction with anybody.
But tell that to the snorer.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's important. Like, okay, so talking about affordability, a private room at our retreat is about the same, or even a little bit less than a shared room at most of the main
A
retreats.
lot of the retreats, yes.
Yes.
That's true.
So that's something to pay attention to. But I think that's it. Let's wrap it up.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Till next time.
Till next time.